I'm Chris Traynor. Welcome to Pen Testing Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures, or TTPs. Thanks, everybody in the chat for saying hi. Thanks, Jacon. Appreciate the love. We're going to get started here right away. I said I'm Chris Traynor. I'm a pen tester at Black Hills Information Security. I also do some SANS TAing for Sec 560 and 542 and 504 when I can, when I get time. A handful of certifications there from GIAC, and down at the bottom there, that's just my Twitter handle. If you want to follow me just for a bunch of reactions to other people's tweets, usually it involves Star Wars GIFs or something like that. But I'm hoping to put out some more valuable content on there next year. All right, so we're going to dive right into it. Why are we here again? First, we're going to start off with some baseline terminology of pen testing tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I'm going to talk about four main areas, four main tactics for pen testing. We'll start off with Recon, talk about a couple tools there, some account enumeration, password spraying, and authorization bypass. I have a lot in here. As Jason said, this is kind of the build out of a 4-hour workshop that I'm going to be doing in about 3 weeks at BHIS Charleston here in South Carolina. I'll put the link for that at the end. We just opened up some more seats. If you are in Charleston, come out. It's free. It's Friday night, like 5 to 9. Going to be a lot of fun. It is in person only, sadly, and it is not recorded this year. So hopefully I'll be able to redo these things in a more elaborate way. But we got a lot to get to. So I'm going to try to move into things, hopefully not too quickly. At each section here, I'll kind of pause and take a glance at the questions and see if there are any that I can answer. If not, there's a whole group of Black Hills people that are very helpful in making this a smooth experience for me and for you. A little note, some of the screenshots and stuff that I put into the slide deck, they are taken from other blog posts, things like that other people have put out there for the sake of showing something that is actionable and illustrating things. I'll try to call those out as I go through, just to give credit where it's due. So first up, baseline terminology. So we're all talking about the same thing. We all understand what I'm saying when I say it, hopefully. Baseline thing, penetration testing does not equal red teaming, right? When I'm talking about these tactics, there may be some overlap in activities for red teams, but more often than not, we're talking about it in the context of we're not trying to be quiet. We're not trying to be evasive. We're not being sneaky. What I'm going to show you can be loud at times on a network when you're worried about things being monitored. So that's why I call this out first and foremost. Penetration testing, we're worried about finding the things in the allotted time we're given, and we can be loud, banging pots through the hallways of the network as much as we want. That's not really our goal, to be sneaky. Second point is automation and manual efforts equal a good penetration test, right? So a lot of the tactics, a lot of the techniques, and a lot of the procedures I'm going to show you, it's kind of a mix of here's a tool, but here's what you need to do as well manually to analyze what's happening here. If you're just running automated scans, if you've got a customer, if you are an organization and you're just running an automated scan, in my opinion, a manual effort on top of that scan will yield you better results. That's what a good penetration test is. And some basic definitions next. I hate throwing definitions on slides. I really do. But just so we're all talking about the same thing, National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, defines TTPs in this below way, right? Tactic is the very highest level of description of something. Technique is just a little bit more granular, and procedure is about as granular as you're going to get. Now, why I really hate this, and I know I call this pen testing TTPs, I really do hate using the words tactics, techniques, and procedures because they all sound so very similar. And even NIST defines them extremely similar, giving no real delineation. So the little sub bullets underneath each one of them is kind of how I try to think of them, and I'll illustrate the point in a moment. So for a tactic, you can try to think of it as what is the intended effect that you're trying to achieve. For techniques, what is the tool or mechanism that you're going to use to achieve that tactic? And a procedure is how are you going to use, is the execution of that tool or that mechanism to achieve that intended effect, right? So kind of building up to each other or tearing down, depending on which way you look at it. But I like to think of them as tactic is the intended effect, techniques is what you're using to achieve it, and the procedure is how you do those. So how do I like to explain things, relate them to people? Well, at every chance I get, I'll try to use Star Wars references all the time. So to illustrate what I was just saying, a tactic, the rebel tactic in Star Wars New Hope, episode 4, is their intended effect is going to be to blow up the Death Star, this impending doom for the galaxy, right? They're going to hit a certain point and they're going to blow it up and they're going to save everybody from the evil empire, right? Evil subjective, depending on which way you go, if you're rebel inclined or imperial inclined, that's the intended effect, destroy the Death Star. The technique that the rebels used, or their mechanism to achieve that intended effect, is to launch a series of squadrons of one-man fighters. They looked at their target. They said, this isn't going to be great because they're going to be looking for large-scale attacks. That's what the defenses are built around. I'm just mentioning this, but again, we're not trying to be overly sneaky. And in this episode, you can clearly see they're not being sneaky either. They're flying straight at the thing and they're hitting it straight on. Right? They're no longer sneaking aboard it and trying to do sneaky things. But the tool or mechanism that the rebels are using are these groups of fighters, right? Their procedure, how they execute, is that trench run down the Death Star to reach that exhaust port that's only 2 meters wide and hit it. Toss a torpedo down it and watch the chain reaction make the whole thing go boom, right? That's the execution phase of it. Now, if you're familiar with this episode, which I hope you all are, otherwise this whole analogy might be lost on you, is that at the very end of this execution, Luke actually disables his targeting computer. So he has an execution, he has a plan of what he's going to do to achieve that intended effect and blow up the Death Star, but at the end of it, he realizes that he has to step back, disable his automated stuff, those automated scans, and he has to do some things by feel. He has to, well, he uses the Force. We use the input that we have from our tools, but he manually executes this procedure. And he's the only one that can successfully blow up the Death Star, right? Because he's our hero, right? The hero of the series. So hopefully that helped illustrate what I mean when I say tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I think of them more along the lines of, jump back, more along the lines of an intended effect, a tool or mechanism to achieve that, and then the execution of how we use that tool or that mechanism. So our first tactic is reconnaissance. Tactic / intended effect. I'll try to use both terms on most slides here. But like I said, I think earlier in the pre-show banter, I was making changes to these slides right up till a few hours ago. So hopefully they all fall in line. Reconnaissance is our first tactic, right? The intended effect is to get all the information we can. As a penetration tester, information is one of the most important things that we can gather, one of the most important actions we can perform. Right. So why is it important? You can never have too much information, and it may reveal otherwise hidden systems or services of your target. So we have to talk about reconnaissance. Always, always, always. And you always want to listen to Morpheus whenever he gives you advice there. What if I told you doing recon now will lead to less stress later on? Morpheus has always got the best advice for any sort of hackers, right? So we're talking about reconnaissance. And of course, with reconnaissance, we have to mention Nmap. Nmap is a fantastic tool created by Gordon Fyodor. I always say Lion or Leon. I don't know how to say the last name, but it's right there on the screen. You can say it however you wish. But the most common thing that I see people get hung up on is, oh, Nmap is a port scanner. It is so much more than just a port scanner. For pen testers, Nmap used in the right way can be so helpful. And one of the ways it does that is it uses what's called the Nmap scripting engine or the NSE scripts. They're broken out into 14 categories. I have them listed out there if you want to see them. The most important thing to remember is these scripts that can be called, and we'll see an example of it in the next slide, is a script can belong to multiple categories. It is not mutually exclusive. You can have a script that belongs to the auth category as well as, and it also belongs to default, to safe, to fuzzer, or you can have something that only is a NSE script for exploitation, right? So you got to pay attention to those. I call those out because you want to make sure that you're only running the types of scripts you want to run. That's safe for your engagement. Right. And one of the huge strengths of Nmap is its output files. Output files are fantastic from all of our tools, from all of the mechanisms that penetration testers use, because they can be consumed by other tools. If they're built in that sort of pen testing mindset ecosystem, a lot of tool developers go way out of their way to make sure that their tool isn't some standalone thing. It can either ingest the results of another tool, or its output can be ingested by another tool. Some of the examples of Nmap tools that can intake its output files are Recon-ng, Eyewitness, Metasploit, and just a ton more. So a little bit of an example here for Nmap. We're going to show, this is actually a snippet. I try to call out the blogs. This is a snippet from a blog post by Jordan Drysdale, one of our analysts here at Black Hills Information Security, and it's from a blog post called "A Pen Tester's Voyage: The First Few Hours." And I wanted to call that out very specifically because Nmap is one of those very first things you do. Recon should be one of the first things you do as a penetration tester. So in this slide right here, I'll break out what the command is doing for those not too familiar with Nmap here and show the results. So in that first box number 1 at the command at the very top, we're specifying that Nmap is going to do scans on UDP protocol and TCP protocol. UDP is a SU, TCP is a ST. The next box over there is we're specifying ports. If you don't specify ports in your Nmap scan, it's going to, by default, scan the top 1,000 ports as Nmap defines them that are on the internet. So how it does that, the creator of it, there's a whole backstory on how they defined what the top 1,000 most common ports are. I'm not going to get into how he did that since we're short on time. But basically, if you don't define the exact ports, it's going to default to scanning 1,000. Here in Jordan's example, he specified UDP port with that capital U : 137, and he defined T for TCP protocol for ports 139 and 445. So he's only scanning 3 ports for this scan. Very targeted. He knew what he was looking for, or he's trying to produce a reproducible screenshot for a report on something he found. Now he took it a step further and he defined an NSE script here, like -- script argument or option. And he defined the SMB2 security mode NSE. Now NSE just stands for the file type, just a Nmap scripting engine, but the name gives you a little bit of hints of what it's going to be doing. What is the security mode of this SMB version 2 server or service that's running, right? Now, I gave an example before that an NSE script can belong to multiple categories. This is one of those examples here. This script actually belongs to the default, the safe, and the discovery categories for NSE. So you could specify -- script discovery instead, and it will run all of the scripts in that category. But if you define no scripts, you can just say it's going to run default if I pass a certain argument. Right? I think it's --A. We'll run all the default scripts in that category. Now down below the result is here. You've got 3 open ports, and you have the NSE script results specifying that UDP port 137 has SMB service running, and the message signing is enabled, but it is not required. Right? So this is important. It may seem like a one-off toss away, but we'll get into some scenarios later on in this presentation that will show how you can take this information from Recon and actually build upon it to an actionable, exploitable condition. So here again, that's Nmap. We're going to move on now. I'll pause at the end of the Recon section after this tool and take a glance over at the questions just so that we can move through these sections here. Our next section is Recon-ng. That's our next Tool, that's our next mechanism by which we will achieve reconnaissance. It's a reconnaissance framework, very closely mirrors the look and feel of Metasploit. So if you're familiar with one of these, you can move between the two pretty well and not be too tripped up by different commands at the command line. Recon-ng, similar to Metasploit, uses different modules to achieve different recon actions. Some of those modules, as a little note, they do require API keys. A lot of those are free. Some of them are paid API keys. It really depends on which module you're looking at. But one of the main purpose of Recon-ng is to build in-tool database of 13 tables. And then they're all listed out there so you can screenshot them or take a look, right? Trying to take the contents of one table and recon against that using different modules and input those results to another table. I'll show an example of this in the next couple slides, so it's not too lost. This is just the startup screen for Recon-ng. The reason I threw this up here is so you can clearly see in the bottom left there's over 100 modules for Recon-ng. It's very well built out. It's very, very much community supported, but you can see there are different categories of those modules as well. There are a handful in reporting, a handful in import, but the overwhelming majority is focused purely on reconnaissance. And that should go along right with its name, its purpose, reconnaissance, right? I called out these different module types because I want this to be abundantly clear for people initially coming into using Recon-ng, right? That first box on this slide here for Recon-ng shows import / then some values. 4 different ways you can import other tools or other data into Recon-ng to start your reconnaissance off. So you're not starting from scratch. So you got right there at the very bottom of that first box is import Nmap. This can take the output of Nmap and it will dump it into Recon-ng's in-tool database and populate some of those tables so that you are starting from the point that you left off with your initial Nmap scan. You're losing none of that reconnaissance. You are only building upon it. The next 3 red boxes down there, these are the categorizations. Recon, you can see that's the category of those modules at the bottom half there. The middle section between those slashes is why I wanted to call this out, because I've talked to a lot of people and they don't really understand it. The first word in that middle section, in this case, that second to last box, is companies. Companies is the database table that is providing the input for that specific module. That dash domains, that second word, is the name of the table where that module will try to dump its results. So in that line right there, you're seeing that it's a reconnaissance module category, taking data from the company's table, doing something with it, and dumping the results into the domains table, building out that domains table. And that very last bottom box, that last value is just the name of the module. Some of them are more helpful than others and more self-explanatory than others. But there's a great walkthrough of Recon-ng, and I stole some of these screenshots and information. There's a BHIS blog post out there called "What's Changed in Recon-ng 5.6." Again, it's by BB King. He gives a lot of great input. He goes into some more detail here than we have time for, trying to give you references that you can go and learn more after us here. But let's look at one of those modules in more depth. Here's a module, Recon Domains Hosts Hacker Target. So it's a reconnaissance module taking data from the domains table, trying to populate the host table, and the module name is Hacker Target. It actually uses, in this case, you see down in the middle of the screenshot description, is it uses the hackertarget.com API to find hosts related to the domains that you enter. And we'll see an example of this in the next slide. So you have a little bit more of a built out appearance of it or knowledge of it. The options I highlighted there in the box, a lot of the modules, if not all of them, have different options you can specify. Here is the source, is the only option for this. And it is saying that it's set to the default value. And down below, you can see definitions of what that is. The default value equals select distinct domain from the domains table where the domain is not null, meaning we're going to get a distinct, unique list of domains and take action on those. So the execution of this, we'll show a little example here of Recon-ng, and I think we have one more slide on Recon, then I'll pause for some questions. The top command in the leftmost screenshot there, db insert domains, that's me saying I'm taking a database action to insert a row into the domains table for Recon-ng. And then it gives you a prompt that you can enter information about. Here I'm saying google.com. This is not secretive information. Everybody knows Google. I don't think we're in any problems of showing this information since it's all public OSINT information. So I've entered in that domain into that table. For this example, that's the only domain. It's also the only thing I ever put inside of Recon-ng for this. I loaded up the Recon module that we just talked about, hacker target, and then all I did was type run. 4 commands. That's all I did. And it found 501 hosts related to that domain of google.com. And it just lists it out for ages and ages and ages in the terminal. But once it's done running, which it ran pretty fast, only a few seconds, the next command I entered in there was show hosts, which just showed the content. Remember, we were dumping into the host database table for this example. It shows the now content of the host database table on the right-hand side. So a few of the top 21 rows, it looks like we have IP addresses and we have host names for those different targets. This is immensely helpful. Again, you can never have too much information. You might not take action on all of these, but if you have an organization that's come to you for a pen test, doing this is incredibly, incredibly helpful, right? Because I've been on, I don't know how many engagements where we look at what comes back from our reconnaissance phase of things at Black Hills here, and we go back to the customer before we attack, and we say, here's what we found. And it looks like there's more here than what you gave us for the scope. It looks like there's more available than what you specified. Now, sometimes they say, oh yeah, we forgot about that completely, or, keep those completely out of scope. We don't want to engage those. But this check is crucial because you don't want to just scan and fire away. That's how you get in trouble without permission. That's the difference between a penetration tester and a felon. Permission. So we always want to double check. And the last slide here for Recon-ng is the snippet again from BB's, from something that BB King put out. It's a Recon-ng 5.x cheat sheet that's available. If you just Google that, you'll come up with it. These are some very helpful commands. I wanted to make sure those were in there for those not familiar. And we'll pause for a little bit of questions here. I'll try to look over in the Zoom, see if there's anything.
Chris, we'll just do one. Does it matter if Recon-ng is ran external or internal?
So I mainly have run it externally. The only reason why you would need to run it for an internal is if you're just trying to find out more about your target organization. So if I jump back here to show you that list of table names there, you can see over on the right, I don't know if my mouse will show up, probably won't. There's contacts, weeks, there's locations, there's different profiles. There's a whole bunch of tables here that will give you some open source intelligence. So if you're doing some internal stuff and say you get to the point, we'll talk about this actually, is password spraying, right? Or doing some account enumeration to see if those accounts exist, you could come up with some emails or internal systems that would be valid that you didn't know about before. But definitely do this for an external engagement. Definitely, you can do this depending on the scope of what your internal engagement is. But always, always, always ask permission before you use what you find, or at least alert them that you're doing this.
Chris, give a real short answer to this one and then move on. It says, sure. Since Recon-ng uses the web crawler, will your IP get blacklisted?
Will your IP get blacklisted? I haven't had that problem where my IP gets blacklisted. A lot of these modules, they pull from existing information. I think there's a Shodan module that's out there. So an example, that's pulling data that Shodan has already scraped. You are not actively scanning the target in a lot of these modules. You are simply going out to a service that already exists and collecting that into a centralized place. Same here with hackertarget.com module that we just used. It's using the hacker target API to find stuff about this that has already been discovered. There are certainly modules in there that might get you in trouble, which is why I showed this info command here. Always look to see what the module is actually doing and where it's going to. All right, so the next section that we're going to go through, this is a very short section. This is account enumeration tactic, and the intended effect. Why is it important, right? Scanning overlooks this. Account enumeration is all about finding out more targets, more accounts that we can take action against, right? And we'll show some examples here. And to reiterate the point I made earlier, scanning overlooks this because a scan does not equal pen test. We are not scanners, we are penetration testers, right? So we do more with the tools that we have. The point is that we're identifying those valid accounts for targeted attacks. And a lot of people think of account enumeration as a web app specific thing. And there are ways to use account enumeration as an attack for services. It is not limited to just web applications, though the example we're going to give is against a web app. I want to make that clear. So tool mechanism that we're going to use right for achieving this is a Burp repeater. If you're familiar with Burp, or if you're not, Portswigger's Burp interception proxy is an amazing tool to use for web application tests. You can use it for more things as well, but web application tests, it's fundamental, and it is extremely powerful when used the right way. I could speak for an hour and a half just on Burp all on its own. But the repeater functionality inside of it is a way to manually manipulate and reissue HTTP requests that you have captured from your browser, from your client on your machine. And it's an easy way to analyze the application's response to how you manipulated those requests. And that is going to be key about what we're trying to do here with account enumeration. So how do we do this? We are taking advantage of flawed authentication logic in a web application. And it only takes 2 steps to do it. Very quick, very easy, but something scanners can't really do. We're going to observe what the web application does when you try to authenticate. So step 1 is you log into that web application, or you attempt to, with a wrong password, but a known existing account. So if I have a real account, that's what we want to start off with as a penetration tester. That's what I'm going to use here. A real account that does exist, but the wrong password. Step 2 is log into the application, or attempt to, with what you know is a non-existent user account, something that absolutely does not exist. You know this, so that you can see what the responses look like from the web server based on these 2 conditions. And you might think, well, it's just going to say it's not going to log me in. Well, the beautiful thing about web applications is they're individual, unique little snowflakes. They all handle things a little bit differently, and they can give you a lot of information based on how they handle stuff. So we're looking at differences in response codes, response times, and response sizes. So how do you do this inside of Burp? I have a window here. It's very narrowed down to not try to reveal anything. This is not anything from a Black Hills engagement. This is just a random site online. I just tried to log in. And you see the 2 post requests up there. This is me attempting to log in. Burp has captured these requests, just passing through it, not altering anything yet. And I right click on one of them and I hit send to repeater. That's going to bring me over to the repeater tab of Burp, where I can change all of these different values, anything in the request that I want. And this example was so long of a request body, I had to really trim it down. But what we're looking for here is you're looking for that user email value, right? Which I've redacted out there and placed it right there. A little question I just noticed off the side of my eye: is Burp better than OWASP Zap? In my opinion, unequivocally, yes. Burp Pro is way better than OWASP Zap, but I'll dive into that more a little bit later. So we have a user email value, and I'm showing this because this is what Burp sees and presents to you as you pass through. So in the repeater, I kept a known good value, and I just hit that send button in the top left. And this is the response I get back. We look at those 3 things. The response code at the top happens to be 200, I remember I tried this with a password that was no good. I knew this was the wrong password, but it was an existing user account. The response code was 200. And in fact, in this example, whether it was a good user, a valid user, or an invalid user, it always gave a 200 response. That's a great defense to make this tack a little bit harder if you're a dev out there. Give the same type of response code. But down at the bottom right is the response time and the response size. How large is it when it comes back to us, and how long did it take to get back to us, right? How much thinking did the application server do before it replied back to our request? This is key. In the very next slide, we're going to see why. I blew these up very, very specifically without showing more steps for the sake of brevity here. A valid user in this case, while they both invalid gave a 200 response code back, a valid user would reply with a response body of 2012 bytes or thereabout. It varied a little bit, but not significantly. And it gave a response time of 207 milliseconds. An invalid user account, one that does not exist in the system, gave about 200 bytes less of a response size, and it responded about 65 or 70 milliseconds faster. So it was doing a logic check on that back end. The first thing it did was, does this account exist? Yes. Let me check the password, bad password, reply back. The next one for the invalid user was, let me check if this account exists. No, it does not. Stop the logic process, immediately respond back to the request and say bad. So this is a very telling difference that can lead a penetration tester into identifying accounts that exist in a system and do not exist in a system for later, more targeted attacks, right? If you're trying to narrow down which accounts you want to go after, you can use breach data and populate a script to run through these scenarios and find out which batch of those email accounts from the breach data exist in, let's say, Disney Plus, and that went under a credential stuffing attack almost immediately after it launched years ago, or any other service. And we want to identify them. So like I said, that was a very short little section on account enumeration. See if we got any specific questions around that over in the chat. Jason, do you have any that you picked out?
Does this response time need to average the does response time need to average the response time? Can server load or traffic throw off your results? And if so, how frequently?
Yes. Yeah. So there is a little variation. Like I said, in our example of what is the execution, what's our procedure, there is some manual analysis that you give here. That manual analysis in this case is take about the average, right? Resubmit that same request of that valid user bad password 10 times. Take the average of that. That's roughly what you're going to be dealing with. Do the same thing with the invalid user. About 10 times. You could do more, but let's not hammer the server with a bunch of requests if it's not necessary. Take the average of that. But what you'll see in a script is laying all these all in a row, these different attempts. You're going to be able to clearly determine in a vulnerable system for this, you're going to be able to clearly determine a large enough gap in those response times and response sizes to say, I'm going to sort by those and take that batch I know of valid users from my control test that I did. And then I'm going to hone in my rest of my efforts on those. Maybe you do a password spraying attack on those. That might just be what we're talking about in our very next slides. Password spraying. We're trying to build on what we know here. We've done some reconnaissance. We've done some account enumeration. We're going to show some attempts at password spraying. This is our next tactic. This is huge, right? This is how we get into accounts. Why is it important? People reuse passwords. So many people reuse passwords. I've been doing security stuff for over half a decade. I was doing software development stuff and QA stuff before then. I'm the person in the family who rest of my members come to me and say, "Hey, you do computery stuff. What should I do?" Or I have this password or that password, and they reuse the same ones all the time. And I try to tell them, use a password manager, use unique passwords. It's hard for people that are not in our field to get that, to use it, and to understand the impact. even people who do use different passwords, they don't rotate them very often. If it becomes part of breach data, third-party public breach data, which is our very next bullet point there, assume that someone knows that password. And I know a lot of people that just shrug it off and say, another breach, who cares? My data has been breached left, right, and center. What difference does it make anymore? This is the difference, right? A lot of our penetration testing TTPs revolve around passwords. We may not be trying to find a zero-day exploit in your web application or in your service. We are just using accounts that exist. And once we get in, is that account privileged? If it's not, we'll try to pivot. We'll try to do some lateral movement and find an account or find a system where that account is privileged and build from there. The last point on here is common passwords. Daniel Meisler, I hope I'm saying that name right, has sec lists out there on GitHub. It has a whole huge list of what the most common passwords are, bad passwords in clear text. These things work. I can't say that enough. Common passwords work. Reusing them works to get into systems. A little bit of note about password spraying and its differences. Password spray attack tactic is using a single password for a whole population of user accounts, right? Thank you, Johnny C, for dropping that link in there for SecList. I appreciate that. We're using a single password for an entire population of user accounts. We are not using multiple passwords. We are not doing multiple authentication attempts. We are doing one attempt per user account using the same password for all of them. Now, what this does is it'll increase the probability of discovering weak passwords in an organization, right? If we're using something very simple, something that we would do all the time as penetration testers, is the season and the year. People love this thing. What is it now? Is it fall right now? I think fall 2022. Guarantee you'll get a hit on a large enough organization with that. Guarantee you'll get a hit with a large enough web app with that. It's gonna happen. What we do by only doing one attempt for authentication per user account is we're decreasing the likelihood of lockouts. Nothing will piss off a customer more is if you accidentally lock out the CEO's account to a critical system. That is going to get you in trouble. Worse is if you lock out some of the IT staff by doing guessing all over the place. So the important things here is this is different from credential stuffing, different from password guessing. It is not password cracking. We are using a single password that we choose, whether that's from part of breach data or just fall 2022, because we're probably going to get a hit. We are not stuffing credentials into authentication, though that's a different style of attack. We're not guessing. Where guessing would be one user account with a huge list of passwords, probably get you locked out. And cracking is we're not cracking any hashes here. We're not doing any of that. Little note for this tactic, you want in a rules of engagement call, if you're on a penetration test, you got a customer, or if you're internal, ask, what is the password or the account lockout policy for my target system? Is it 3 bad guesses every 30 minutes? Is it 3 bad guesses a day and it'll lock it out? Because that's going to tell you how often, what frequency you can conduct your password spraying. If it's 3 bad guesses in an hour, do 1 password spray attack every hour and 10 minutes so that you're well outside that window. The reason you want to only do 1, not 2, even though there are 3 chances, is you're probably doing this during a workday. How many times have you tried to type in a password to a system that you use all the time and you fat finger it and you hit the wrong character and you blow one of your chances? People are doing that all day long. So you don't want to be in the situation where you've guessed wrong twice in that window and the CEO guessed wrong once and now his account's locked, because they're not going to blame him. They're going to blame you. So the tool that we're first going to talk about this, and we'll talk about two main tools to do this, is Burp Intruder. Same Burp interception proxy. This is going to be targeting a web application. The Intruder takes what the repeater was doing and makes it a lot more automated. It allows you to customize your attack against web application. It allows you to specifically specify 1 or more sets of payloads. In this case, we're just going to be specifying a user account payload and where to place that, or what they call in Burp positions. And we'll show examples of this so you kind of get what I'm saying. And if you're lost a Burp Intruder, never used it before, portswigger.net has a ton of documentation out there, great screenshots, walk you through it, go a lot more in depth. They even have a training system out there where you can talk about these and try them out against their systems. So this is Burp Intruder. They're all different types of attack types. We don't have the time to dive into that right now. Like I said, I could spend an hour and a half just talking about Burp easily and all of its features. Here I've captured a request for a login authentication form. Down in the bottom there, you see that there's an email that's specified. Those two little weird symbols, if you can see, I hope it's big enough for you. There are two little weird symbols, I don't even know what you call them, on either side of that email field. That's because I specified it. If you look at the buttons on the right-hand side, there's add, clear, auto, and refresh. That same little symbol is on 3 of those buttons. That's the way of Intruder. You specify a position in your request where you want your payloads to be injected. Now, in this case, the password was encrypted, so you're not really even going to see it there. I just redacted it out for good measure. We're going to use the same password for all of these attacks. The only thing that we're going to change with each request is what the email or username is going to be. And here's based on Burp's most common list of usernames. A lot of these you're not going to see inside of a web app, but as you go down the list, it definitely isn't there. But I'd highly recommend looking into sec lists to see what Daniel Meisler's put out there as well for common usernames. If you're on a targeted engagement, this is where you can go back to Recon-ng and find those emails that people put out on LinkedIn and they're using their corporate email address or their company address. Look through that breach data and pull that list. Populate that on here and be as targeted as you can. I only use this list to illustrate how to do it. And you can select Burp's built-in one. The built-in one has just under 9,000 common usernames that you can use. So when we fire this off, we're going to be hammering that system with almost 9,000 requests in a matter of less than a minute or a couple minutes, maybe, depending on how fast your system is and how you adjust the finer settings in this tool. We're going to be hammering it. Again, we're not trying to be sneaky. We're not trying to be evasive. We are penetration testers, not red teamers. We are trying to find the things, and we may only have a couple days to do it. This is the results, what you were trying to see there. This isn't from a real engagement. This is showing the results of an actual Burp Intruder execution. You're seeing results here, the payloads that's specified, Atom and root, right? On the list, admin, test, guest, all of those ones were payloads that we specified. Status codes from each of those responses being 200. It's 200s all the way down. So like I said in our other example, for enumerating account enumeration, sometimes this is hard. Sometimes it's not all 302. Sometimes they don't give you back an error that's an error code that is clearly showing you what worked, what didn't, right? And those are good web applications that do that. And in this case, I only highlighted the top 3, but the length, that response length is all 3180 somethings, right? But if you tested this with a valid login before you did this attack, you would know what's my response code, what's my average length. Those things are important. And if you clicked on each one of those inside of Intruder itself, you would be able to see the response in more detail. You could see that response size again and the response time. I think that there's a time, I think there's time columns inside of Burp. I believe they changed what they're called. They're not just called time or something like that. It's in there. If you look through Burp Intruder of that portswigger, you'll see where you can select more columns and drop that down. I just didn't include it for our purposes here. That's it for Burp for our talks right now. We're going to do the same type of an attack, the same tactic of password spraying, but this time we're going to be targeting SMB service. And this is going to use the SMB module from Metasploit. This is a pretty quick section here as well. So we'll get through it. We'll get to some more questions. Basically, what this module is going to try to do is try to attempt SMB logins on a range of machines that we specify and then it's going to report the successful login attempts. Very simple, right? Try to log in. If it works, great. Tell me. If it doesn't, toss away account. Again, I'm going to say it again. That's why I said it in like the second or third slide. This is very loud on a network. All failed login attempts against Windows boxes will get an event log of that failed login. Right? If you're trying to keep out of the blue team's vision, if you're on a red team engagement, if you're on a purple team engagement, you want to be very, very careful if you're using this module, because if you hit that button and you didn't configure it right, you're going to set off alarm bells all over the place. Or at the very least, you're going to leave a lot of artifacts behind for them to find you. So again, pen testing does not equal red teaming. One of the huge benefits of this module is any successes using this password spray can be used in a subsequent module that will show very briefly after this, called psexec. That will get you a interpreter session. It's fantastic. So, a little example. This is the Metasploit framework, CLI. I've already loaded up the SMB login module at the very top. You can see where it's an auxiliary module. It's a scanner, SMB category, doing SMB login. Very similar structure to Recon-ng in its naming, right? I typed in the options command, will show me all the options. I think there are even more than this for this module. The ones we're concerned with is specifying our hosts, which is our targets, our range of targets. You can do CIDR blocks in there. Domain is defaulted to .dot. It's just going to use whatever domain you're on. This is primarily for an internal, I should note, internal network penetration test. This is where this is really useful. And we specified a password of, remember I said common passwords from sec lists, the bad things you see all the time, password 1 exclamation point. It's gonna hit somewhere, right? And down the very bottom is just a text file, individual lines. Each line has a username. That's what I want to try. Right? So again, we specify one password and we guess it against a whole bank of usernames. This is what it looks when you execute it. The top commands you can see setting our hosts and setting user files. In this example, they set a password file, but we're not doing that here because we're worried about account lockout. And we hit run. And in this example, they've got a successful SMB authentication. Root user, password monkey. Great. That'll be in most things. So what you're trying to get here is you're trying to get a successful authentication to a service that's running on an internal network, on a server. When you get this is password spraying like we've been talking about. When you get this, you can move on to the next module. And this is the only example where I bring you to actual exploitation. psexec module will get you an interpreter session on that target if you're really lucky. If you find a good known credentials from your password spraying attempt from SMB login, drop it into psexec should be the next thing that you do. You're entering the actual password itself, or as an added bit of fun for the psexec module, you don't even need the password. If you've just been monitoring traffic and you grab the hash, right? You grab the hash value, you don't even need to crack that hash. You can put that in the psexec module options and use that, because Windows machines, it's not a bug, it's a feature. They want to accept hash values for a lot of these authentications. psexec is going to show you that. I'm going to show you what the module looks like when you do this. Again, I stay away from live demos because live demos are terrible and they go wrong for me all the time. The psexec module is an exploit module. You are actually exploiting a weakness. A weakness, what we call an exploit, Windows calls a feature. It's subjective, depending on your mindset of a penetration tester. And we are using our TTPs to achieve a goal, right? Our goal is to exploit the system. Our goal is to get more from what we are not supposed to know about. We set the R hosts again. These are blanks, just a snapshot from another blog post. We would set the R host of that successful attempt that we saw on the last screen from our SMB login module, set the password and set the user, where I believe it was root and monkey was the password. And we just set that R host to that system. That's it. By default, the payload is going to be set up for an interpreter reverse TCP payload. Here's what it looks like when you exploit it. You type exploit. It does magic. establishes a connection, tries those credentials. If you're successful, bam, interpreter session, right? We typed get UID in there and we got the server's username. The fun thing is once you have an interpreter session, a whole huge host of possibilities open up to you. It's awesome. You can do a lot with interpreter that, again, you could spend an hour talking about, but we've only got 7 more minutes. If you typed shell in there, it would drop you in to a shell on the system that looks exactly like if you open the command prompt. And you can do everything you could do as if you were actually on that system as a legitimate user. Questions around this? I saw the chat going crazy there. Over there. Jason, did you pick up any questions around this section? I know it was a bit there.
Yeah, a lot of the questions are being answered by the other testers on, and that is the sound of lunch. Does enabling SMB signing help with this?
Does enabling SMB signing? It would, because it's going to stop it's going to stop some of that SMB login stuff, right? So, can I repeat all of that? That was one of the questions. This will be recorded, will be out, so you can rewatch it at your leisure. SMB signing, when we did that initial scanning, being required, being not required, that's one of those what we would call defense in depth things. It could stop some of these attacks. It would require where you're coming from, right? And some signing of that authentication attempt would be in there. I wish I could answer that full question in depth right now, but I don't. What I'll try to do is I'll dig up some actual documentation on it, and I'll try to share that out on Twitter to get that full explanation for you and some of those weaknesses. We don't have time for authorization bypass, unfortunately. We only got 5 minutes left. I think, Jason, you were going to provide these slides somewhere, so the content's there.
They have already been given out.
Right. If you look in the notes section of the slides, there's links to the different blog posts I pulled some of these screenshots from. They do a great job of explaining things. Some of them are Black Hills based, some of them are other. If you don't know what's going on here at this point, you're way too afraid to ask. You can follow me on Twitter, send me a message, just CS Traynor, Traynor. Ask me on there. I will try to get you the answers. Again, the great supportive team at Black Hills here, they've been trying to keep track of all the different questions coming in so that we can accumulate those. And I'll try to knock through those questions in the next few days and just post the answers on Twitter. All right. If you're not sick of my voice yet, then I do, like I mentioned at the beginning, I have a BHIS Charleston workshop where we'll be talking about intro to penetration testing at large. It's going to be a 4-hour free workshop. It won't be recorded. It's in person only. If you're around the Charleston, South Carolina area, we just opened up more seats. We sold out a few days ago, so we got a bigger room, and now we've got, I think, up to 70 seats available. Jump on that registration link and a little tiny URL there, so it's real quick for you. I have done a PancakeSCon 2 talk. That was about a year ago. It's focused on getting into security. And PancakeSCon 2, you talk 15 minutes for one security topic and one non-security topic. But where the second half of mine was around stroke awareness. It's a topic that's extremely personal to me. If you're not familiar with stroke, how to identify it, how to be a little bit aware of it, it's a 30-minute talk. I highly encourage you to go out there and watch it. And the last link there is an InfoSec career podcast that I did probably a few years ago, talking about breaking into the field, or at least how I did it, transferring into a security-focused role. Then, of course, Ferris Bueller here, right? You're still here. It's over, go home, but I'm going to let Jason do the actual go homes and signing off here. But thanks again for joining. I really appreciate you joining the talk. Thank you, Jason, all the Black Hills team members that signed on answering questions so I didn't have to. And hopefully I'll talk to you all soon. Jason, I'll just put my bio thing back up here, and you can sign off.
Yeah, so we're actually going to do something that I wasn't planning on. We're going to do like 5 minutes of post-show banter. So Great. We had a bunch of questions come in. I want you to get those questions. And so if you're sticking around for about 5 minutes, feel free to throw a question into the chat that you might still have, that hopefully we can get to it. So we'll take 3 or 4 of those and we'll answer those live. So welcome back, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us here today. We got Bo and Brian and some others. We've been answering questions in the back end. We've been answering questions in Discord, or have you been answering each other's questions? But let's do some post-show banter. So what we're going to do right now is, Chris, thank you so much for your talk today. Thank you for being willing to share your knowledge with the audience. And thank you so much for being here with the community. This was your first webcast, and you're going to keep coming back and doing more. So that's great. And I think what I'm going to ask you to do is, once you figure out this 4-hour workshop and you got some labs or something in it, we're going to come back and do it as a free workshop. Where you're going to get to do it for 4 hours here on the internet. And so that'll be great.
I'd love to do that, Jason. Yeah.
Like, because Bo, you did a 4-hour workshop, and that thing was amazing. We had like 1,700 live attendees. It was great.
Yeah. Just make sure you have like lots of help to answer questions.
Yeah. I think the count for the B-sides, we initially had 35 slots open. That sold out. And now we're up to 70. And they said, we have a room that can fit 150 people. Do you want to put a cap, or do you want to just open it up to 150? And I was like, if it's yes. That many, I would probably need help. So let's just keep it at 70 for now. It's not a big con. So
see if you can get 2 TAs to help you with the 70 people. Because when you get up to that point,
I've already tapped a buddy here to help me with setup. I roped him in. But I do see a question in here that I want to make sure is clear. One of the slides, the section that we didn't get to, is around authorization bypassing. That uses a tool called Authorize. There's no H. It's an Authorize Burp extension. Okay. James Golovich, I think you asked that in the chat. It's not a typo. That's how the tool is. I'll try to find the link, or if somebody from the Black Hills team can find that, drop it in the chat real quick. Authorize. Just so that's clear.
Are there other ways to lock down SMB besides signing and encryption? Both of those add an encryption overhead and make SMB transfer slower.
Yeah, so I'm going to open that up to the rest of the team. Securing things is definitely something that we work on in our reports and saying that, but off the top of my head, I can't list out all of the examples. Bo, you have a...
Sorry, I had to search for a Deadpool meme real quick. I missed the question because somebody said Jason looks like Ryan Reynolds. Sorry. What was the question?
I get that. I see Jason looks like Ryan Reynolds.
Are there other ways to lock down SMB besides signing and encryption? Both of those add an encryption overhead and make SMB transfers slower.
I mean, like, so those are good options, right? Like, I mean, in general, I would say locking down SMB really comes down to your password policies in most cases. Because when we're like what Chris talked about with password spraying, like the whole point of us doing password spraying is to obtain a credential, right? So if we can't obtain a credential because you have strong password policies and your users are doing a good job picking passwords, that's, kind of the end of the game there. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to like actual like technical implementation wise, sure, you can implement, up, various levels of encryption and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like if you have users that have weak passwords, that's going to be the weak point.
Is there a way to connect Nmap or Recon-ng with Metasploit for automated exploits?
Is there a way to connect Nmap to Recon-ng or Metasploit? That's the question?
It's either Nmap to Metasploit or Recon-ng to Metasploit, I think, or both.
I'm sure that you could script some automation between them. I would caution against it, mostly because, as I said before, like scanning automated things, they're great. They don't equal penetration tests. Luke had to disable his targeting computer to actually look and feel about what's happening. The worst thing that you can do in a penetration test is accidentally attack either a system that was explicitly out of scope or a system that was not even for your customer. Right?
Yeah. So on that topic, there have been tools that have been built around that exact concept. So actually, it's funny because you had the Star Wars theme. So Marcello, who used to work here at Black Hills, he wrote a tool called Death Star, and that was the whole point of Death Star, was to basically identify paths of escalation and then automatically pivot and attempt to escalate to domain admin. Again, like that's not a great idea. You want to be driving whenever, especially when you're, exploiting various services and passwords and whatnot. Also, Metasploit used to have module called DB Autopwn. And that was the one that would automatically go and try to exploit anything they found. So again, like Chris said, you need to be manually driving for the most part. Like I would say enumeration, like getting the information to help drive the rest of your exploits is okay, right? Getting that information so that you understand where you're going. Totally automate that. But when it comes to the actual exploitation phase, definitely be careful.
All right, last question. A lot of questions came in. Thank you so much. We try to do post-show banter when we can. This time we're doing it for a couple minutes. So this one is, how often do you come across zero-day vulns to get initial access?
For myself, not often. Right, zero-day vulnerabilities, and there's a lot of. I kind of put it in the description here, the dark art of penetration testing, and a lot of the stuff that I focused on during this pen testing TTP talk was finding out which accounts are valid, trying credentials with them, right? That's going to get you your initial access. From there, you pivot. From there, you make some lateral movement. You try to find a system that may have that account as a local admin, then you get some more permissions, things like that. I've never exploited a zero-day exploit on a penetration test to any real effect.
This question came in a few times. I want to make sure we answer it before. Does a password manager not make password spraying defunct? But what about cloud password managers? Do they not store the master password in the browser for the Vault online?
So let's say you're using LastPass as a password manager, which is what I use. Okay. So LastPass as a password manager has a tool plugin for your browser that you can put in there. You authenticate through that plugin to LastPass to gain access to your stored passwords. You're hopefully completely unique for every, and random and long for every single system that you log into or service. Now, you are setting up an authentication session. LastPass actually only allows you to have a session active for 30 days. It's not a you log in only once type of thing, which is YOLO. You only log in once, right? It's not like that. But what you want to have for that single master key password for any password manager, whether that's Keybase, LastPass, OnePass, whatever you use, make it long. Don't use it anywhere else. Make sure that you can remember it. And that's your key to everything, right? It's not going to be the same vulnerability as if any of the web applications you use LastPass with to log in. Let's say you use it for LinkedIn. LinkedIn has another breach. That password's burned. Reset to another randomly unique long password. One of the good examples I have of this is actionable. Why this matters for unique passwords is Disney Plus. I mentioned it before, and I'm going to call my brother out on this one because he gave me crap for it. I set up a Disney Plus account. I sent him the creds. He's like, this is ridiculous. I'm not typing in that long, unique password. I'm not doing that. He set up his own instead, right? Not 2 days after the launch or so. I told him, don't do that. Use my unique long one. I promise you only have to type it in one time. You'll keep a session forever. Not 2 days after the launch or so, Disney Plus suffered a credential stuffing attack. The attackers used public third-party breach data, passwords, and usernames from other applications that had weaker security, and they simply reused them on Disney Plus. People reuse their passwords. That's all it was.
All right, everybody. Chris, you have any final words for us? Final words, Chris.
Final words. I think I said a lot of words. Again, thanks everybody for joining. Jason, thanks for helping organize, and Ryan, everybody else in the Black Hills team. Again, if you've got any questions, I didn't get to them, I'll try to run through them the next few days, post some answers on Twitter. Jason shared out the slides for as good as they are. There's not a lot of bullet points in them, but thank you everybody for joining. Hopefully talk to you again soon.
All right. So we try to always keep these 98% content, 2% marketing. Here it comes. If you ever need a red team, threat hunt, pen test, you know where to find us. In the meantime, we'll see you all here next week. And Bo, you have a webcast in like 2 weeks?
Yeah. Somewhere
You're going to hack the cloud?
Something like that. Yeah, we'll try to do some cloud hacking.
All right, so we'll hopefully see you all back here. We also have live streams on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and we do the news on Mondays, but you pretty much need to get going. So let's do that. All right, everybody, we'll see you all next time. Ryan, kill it with fire. Kill it, Ryan. Kill it. Kill it.